or we together are trying to solve a problem for our common end customer, whether that is an enterprise workload that's there that needs to have a fractional or a lit capacity requirement that's going to go multiple different directions, or whether it's a very specifically architected capacity and direction that's going to be demanded by a hyperscaler who's going to operate their own private network amongst various facilities. Has that impacted the timeline, or as you're looking at new development projects? You've obviously already commented, Jeff, that you're building some of that yourself. Is that your only model, or are you taking different models in different sites?
Since day one, our strategy and focus has been in recognizing that connectivity and data centers are inextricably linked together. So we have always been a connectivity provider and a data center infrastructure provider. And now just again to the comments that we've all been making, the scale of that is just growing like crazy. So 5 years ago, I provided a gig of internet to an enterprise customer, and that was more than they use 7 megabits. They buy a gig, they use 7 megabits. Right. The oversubscription was a great money printing machine, right? But now, the hyperscalers again are becoming their own telecoms. It's terabits and terabits, and they need to have the completion and turn up time of the network completely aligned with the turn up time and the completion time and the turn up time for the data center infrastructure, right? Because those things all cost money. If you're Google and you're laying that subsea cable, I don't even know what it costs them to do that, but it's not free. So those things have to be linked together. So there are challenges in the timing of all that as well. And there are always jurisdictional issues, right? As you need to get permits to build the property or the campus and the buildings, and the inspections are crazy. When we're laying fiber, we've got to get a permit from every single jurisdiction along the hundreds of miles of fiber, and you have never been through hell. like you are when you're dealing with jurisdictions, especially, and I say this with love, right? But when you're going through sort of nowhere, a small, community, a county that has 2,000 people living in it, right? They've got a lot of time on their hands. Should I be saying this out loud? But it seems like they've got time on their hands when you come and say, hey, I need a permit to just trench my fiber down your street. It's like being deposed by the CIA or something, right? So challenges all across the board, but connectivity and data center, and they're just so inextricably linked and both explosively growing in scale. I'm gonna go back to my previous comments. It's crazy exciting.
Yeah. Has connectivity changed as you've seen things in the last several years, or you still see it similar to how you've dealt with connectivity to your centers over the last several?
I don't think that it has changed dramatically, but being like a 30-year recovering fiber builder,
right,
and now being in the data center space, I don't ever want to build fiber again. I think about it more from, I've got a specific amount of capital, I'm only going to spend it on data centers. And what we found is the ecosystem of the data centers is just continuing to multiply and grow, right? Because customers are going into those buildings and requiring massive amounts of bandwidth. I'll give a random example, but in Duluth, Minnesota, booming hotbed of the world, we have a data center there, and SpaceX came. We're gonna place our 40 eggs on your land, and we need 400 gigabit connections. They had a carrier building fiber to our facility in Duluth, which is not easy, within 30 days, because the carrier can cost justify building for something like that. And then other carriers are going to come follow them as well. So whether you have specific customers that are at your data center that are attracting people, or you have enterprises that are looking for peering relationships or faster ways to get to the cloud or whatever it is, I kind of view like the telecom hotel of old is dead in a lot of ways. I know that's going to be blasphemous to some people. And it's been replaced by the data centers, because you can get just about anything that you used to have to go there for. Now, if almost any data center within your geography is going to be interconnected with fiber. I don't think that's the hard part of what we do. I think getting fiber to these data centers is fairly straightforward.
Scott, how are you seeing it?
I echo that. I mean, listen, I always say it this way. I mean, fiber is the central nervous system of our industry, right? You got to have that connectivity. We take a little bit different, right? We're not trying to get into the fiber business. We don't want to compete. We want fiber companies to come into our ecosystem, and we want to enable them, and we want to support them so that they grow. But yeah, I similar to what Brett's saying. we don't have the challenges, with given our customer base. It's not an orientation towards hypers where their demands are slightly different, right? So I've expressed all the challenges that I've got within Dartpoints, but certainly the fiber side is not one, right? As long as we have enough robust carriers, and generally what I mean by that is in every one of our locations, largely every carrier that is available in that market, we have in our facility. And I agree with his comments as well of kind of the carrier hotel, right? That is now being enabled in most data centers. So lots of challenges, but I don't spend a lot, right, dealing on a day-to-day basis on the fiber side.
So if I can,
Go ahead, yeah.
Just a quick comment. So Duluth, Minnesota is my hometown. I was born there.
All right.
So be careful about my people.
There you go.
But secondly, to your comments, right? We're the same. We're carrying it. We have all the carriers in our facilities.
Yeah.
You need to.
Yeah.
You need to.
Yeah.
So certain customers. We've always built our own networks anyhow, so certain customers will take network service from us directly.
Right.
Certain customers are like, no. I'll take some. Jeff will take some from you, but we need to also buy something from AT&T. We've got an MPLS VPN. I don't know what it is from AT&T. We're going to take. So carrier neutrality and building carrier hotels is also an important part of this ecosystem. Again, I think we're just in a slightly different spot in having to cater to the hyperscalers, or shouldn't say cater, blissfully be able to provide service to the hyperscalers, and where they need, just an 832 count fiber, and they need it from there to there.
Yeah.
And we're happy to do that for them. So it's fun just to be able to see all of these different ecosystems developing from small to large to huge, and understand the different requirements and try to synergize those, in the same ecosystem, whether it's multiple campuses or on the same campus.
So in fear of sounding like an economic development director for the city of Duluth, I'm also from Minnesota originally.
You hit a sore spot.
And you moved, right?
And I did move because it's really, really cold in Duluth, Minnesota, if anybody doesn't understand. It's already starting to get
June
cold.
and July, Minnesota, beautiful. The rest of the year?
What we're seeing, obviously, though, just by your comments, I think really echoes some of the things that are happening in the marketplace right now. At some scale, just having many different providers that are in the area, even as difficult as Duluth or other similar markets might be, people will come as long as there's enough demand within the individual data center to be able to generate the revenues that are going to make up for that capital expenditure. When you're looking at site selection for your expansion, power isn't always available in the Duluths where there are a lot of network capacity and short capital extensions to be able to get to that site. So one of the things that DF&I is really focused on is how do we create a neutral architecture for the infrastructure as a developer rather than being a telecommunications provider, but just having it much the same way you would a powered shell in proximity to where the power is located, or the other stopping blocks, the other places that will help you define where your geography is. So if it's not Duluth, Minnesota, as you're looking at your next area of expansion, is communication. And if not communication, what are the other things that are barriers to achieving that growth, either in gross power transmission and availability, generation and transmission, or what I'll call power enablement, as you guys described, by expanding the density of the power within your facility and or the usability by increasing the cooling, for example, and the architecture of the interior of your data center to enable the use of that power effectively. Are there, as you're looking at that expansion, are there other challenges? Is communications more of a challenge in that area, and or are there other roadblocks that are slowing you down, and how can we solve some of those problems?
Different customers have different geographical requirements. You mentioned SpaceX. They have a specific algorithm for where they need to place those ground stations, and you landed in the sweet spot, right? You were there. You had a facility, you had the turf, and you had the power, and now the connectivity. And certainly with our enterprise customers, each of them has a different requirement for diversity. Some folks think that diversity means cabinet in opposite corners of the building. Some people think diversity means across the street. Some people think it means across town. Some people think it means 500 miles away. Right. And it depends on who they are and what they're doing. And sometimes we see them making great decisions, and sometimes not so great decisions, but it's their policy. Back to my initial comments about power, what we see for the hyperscalers is they're focusing on where can we find power. And it can be in a swamp in Mississippi, or maybe Louisiana's more swampy. You can be in a swamp in Louisiana, but if there's power there, that's where we're going. And DC BLOX, you figure out how to make this happen for us, and here's a check, and figure out how to make this happen. So we're seeing people flock to power. Again, just the time required for a power generation utility to bring on new power is insane because of the legal and regulatory environment. So we're seeing hyperscalers flock towards places where power is available, whether it's close to geo or whether it's just bare capacity because the population density is lower or something like that. But again, there's customers across the board. Some of them have very specific requirements. I need to be in Duluth. I need to be in Birmingham, Alabama. I need to be in a specific spot because it's across the street from me, and the OpEx of flying my people across the country to service a server doesn't make sense. But others are just racing to the power, and it depends. I'm going to go back to this is crazy exciting solving this problem for these folks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of what I commented before. If you kind of look backwards and you think about how things were built, you kind of just built kind of a standard footprint, and it met kind of the needs of the customers. But now, very much to what Jeff's saying, it's much more customizable, right? You've got to understand your customer requirements, right? You got to anticipate your customer requirements. You got to build an environment that is going to allow for those different demands based on that need. And like you said, that in there lies the excitement, but also it's the challenges that are associated. And then the back end is what you were referencing before, that we're doing kind of unordinary things, right? Where the workload may want to be in point A, but power's in point B. So then the customer goes, well, okay, I'm willing to go to point B because I can't get it at point A, or I'm not willing to wait for point A, right? So both of those are having a cause and effect in terms of how we as operators respond to the customer demands in the market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think site development's different for every company. I mean, where we're building, we own the land, we have available power, we're tacking onto existing facilities we have. So that's the cheapest, highest IRR that we can get from that investment. We're also looking at sale-leaseback opportunities where you have large enterprise customers that have built data centers. They've shrunk their footprint. They don't want to be in the data center business anymore, but maybe they have 5 megawatts sitting at that building, and none of the hyperscalers are going to even be sniffing around that deal. And so there's an opportunity to be looking at some of these where you can pick up 5 megawatts today, take it to 20, continue to grow. We probably are going to be staying away from the complete greenfield, just like going to a city, starting from scratch, because our investors at the scale that we're talking about are not as comfortable with this, I'll call it quasi-speculative nature of some of the stuff that's happening on the hyperscale side. And so for us, I think we're going to be very strategic in trying to find specific locations that fit within kind of our geography. I'm not going to California. I'm not going to New York. I'm probably going to stay out of Texas. So, outside of those areas, there's still a lot of interesting and available power and locations as well that have pretty decent connectivity. So, North Dakota, South Dakota, inexpensive power. Some customers, I think, are going to be starting to quasi-dictate to you, I want X percentage of my power to be green. We can all talk about ESG being dead or not dead or whatever, but we're seeing enterprise customers coming to us saying, we want a percentage of the power that we buy from you to be green. And that is then dictating how we're responding to RFPs on where that workload can be. I can get you almost 100% renewable energy in the exciting city of Duluth. I can't do that in some of the others. And so that's kind of changing or shifting how we're thinking about where do we build, why do we build it, who's going to buy it.
So you've all brought up in one context or another how this changing landscape, whether it is, again, going to where the power is and building new greenfield developments in order to meet the hyperscale demand, or whether it's repurposing existing facilities and expanding the density and capacity that you have, is changing your capital requirements. Can you talk a little bit about how comfortable you are as you forecast this flow of workloads through the entire ecosystem on having concrete ideas around what's the revenue stream look like and how does that impact your ability to access capital to enable this next generation of growth within each of your different types of data center environments?
So again, we service customers, small, medium, large, huge. In terms of getting capital, I mentioned this in my initial comments, which was a signed, a dry ink on a piece of paper by Google or Meta for a 20-year agreement to burn 250 megawatts is a really good piece of paper to show the investors and say, would you like to give us $1 billion? And they say, would you like $2 billion? sometimes. But that is, there's that painful dance too, right? Every time you're looking for money and you need it by October 1st, and they promised it to you in August, right? You're not going to get it until 11:59 p.m. on September 30th, right at the brink of death, or collapse of the galaxy, right? So all of the things are drivers, right? The economics, the technology, the physical space, the geography, the connectivity, the power. For every size customer, the equation is different, and I'm going to say it's fun to solve for X, right? In that equation.
So, full disclosure, right, just so everybody knows, Scott sits on my board, and this is a constant question that I get. So
and we don't have any facilities in Duluth at Dartpoints.
Exactly. So listen, this is a challenge, right? And I in my view, this is more challenging, right, for Brett and I than maybe a little bit where Jeff set with the hyper, right? If you have a defined hyper, you've got a time frame. That's a customer that's willing to wait 2 years, and they're willing to commit to a long term, and they're willing to come in. Well, Brett and I don't have those kinds of opportunities when you're talking about on the enterprise, right? Plus or minus, it's going to vary, but let's say a shelf life of an opportunity in our world is more like 6 months, right, for an enterprise. That's about as long as you're going to get them willing to stay, and even that's a stretch, right, because they just don't tend to plan that far ahead. They want capacity available when they have a need. So that's more challenging for our side of the business, right? We have to, I don't do 20-year contracts. I have no customers in my business for 20-year contracts, right? Ours are more like 3 to 5, right? If I get lucky with maybe a private cloud, I get it up to 7. And so it's just a different profile and a different risk, how we have to plan for our business and how we have to deploy capital to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And so it's challenging, right, to be able to forecast that and to say, and to convince your investor, right, that hey, I need this kind of capital, I got to build this kind of capacity, and oh, by